Well, good evening. I'd like to call this study session of the Lakewood City Council for Tuesday, May 26th to order. The first item for discussion is a joint meeting with the Planning Commission, which is going to be a technological feat, given that we have a tough time joint meeting with the council. Ms. Schumacher, would you cue those folks up? So it appears we have Mr. Daniels, Mr. Pearson, Mr. Wagaman, Mr. Guerrero, and Mr. Wagaman again. I believe, Mr. Daniels, you are the chair, is that correct?
I believe I am, Mayor.
Well, why don't you tell us about your achievements for the year and plans for next year?
Yeah, thank you. You there? Hello?
I am there.
Hello?
But there you go.
Hello?
Hello.
Sorry, I'm in Arizona and I've got very poor internet here. I'm running off my hotspot of my phone, but it's very poor.
I hope your air conditioning is working.
Yes, it is 105 and it's very nice though. So, yeah, thanks. So with my ready fellow mayors and the council's members of the Planning Commission, we've got Ryan Pearson, Paul Wagaman, James Guerrero. I believe that's it here. We also have Conan Coleman Lackady on the Planning Commission as well, and Mrs. Also we have, is Nancy Eccles Hudson. So to go over this before you guys, you have the 2019 accomplishments. I don't know if you want us to go over all of those individually.
You're cutting out, Don.
Yep, I know. Keeps. So, Mr. Guerrero, since Connie's not here, do you have the agenda in front of you? Sorry.
So the 2019 summary and the 2020 work plan?
Yes, do you have that in front of you? Would you mind going over that since my internet is pretty poor?
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Guerrero.
Thank you. So for 2019 accomplishments, and I will just go ahead and read them through. We reviewed the annual housing report, review and recommendations of updated quasi-judicial process. We reviewed a review and recommendation of periodic review of shoreline master program and adoption of restoration plan, review and recommendations of the 2019 comprehensive plan zoning map and text amendments, review and recommendations of 2020 comprehensive plan amendment docket list, review and recommendation of updated sign code, review and recommendation of historic residential densities in the city of Lakewood, review and recommendation of 6-year transportation plan, review and recommendation of new Lakewood Municipal Code Title 18A, Land Use and Development Code, and related amendments to Titles 1, 3, 12, 14, 17, and 18B, review and recommendations of area-wide rezone of 5 parcels from OSR 2 to OSR 1, formerly Fort Slocum Golf Course, review update from Vision 2040 to Vision 2050. And that was our list of the 2019 accomplishments. And of course, probably the biggest one was that Title 18A. And I would say kudos to staff. There was just a whole lot of work that went into that. And so I'm sure you saw that when it came through the city council. Did you have any questions or comments about what we did in 2019?
Any questions from council?
Not yet.
Give your, anybody know how to raise their hand here? All right. Well, welcome, Ms. Lackady. All right. You want to move on to the work plan?
Okay. So yeah, Connie Coleman Lackady and Nancy Hudson Eccles have joined the meeting here. So for the 2020 work plan, let's see. We'll have the election of new officers in February, receive the 2019 annual housing report in February, review of the 2020 comp plan in February. So these are what's been accomplished. Review of the 2021 buildable lands report in February, review of proposed Lakewood Station District sub area planned action and development code in February. And then we skip to May, review of annual development regulations amendment package in May 13th, review of 6-year transportation improvement plan, May 20th, biannual review of downtown sub-area plan, planned action and hybrid form-based code, May 13th. Then we take off for the summer, and then review of the 2021 comprehensive plan docket September 2nd, and the periodic review of comprehensive plan revamp in anticipation of 2023 statutory updates in September, starting September 2nd. So those dates I gave are the start dates, and of course the completion dates are anticipated shortly thereafter, hopefully. So, and then we have down below this 2020 land use and development code parking lot amendments. I guess I'm not sure if that's within our scope for 2020. Is that, you know, Tiffany has her hand up. Yes.
Is that all right to speak, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you. Just to clarify what Mr. Guerrero was referring to, down on the bottom of page 4 of your packet, there's just a number of items listed there that were first raised as part of the potentials for the 2020 comprehensive plan amendment packet. And then they were subsequently put into the parking lot. And there were also some in the Title 18A discussion that were raised and then also put in that parking lot, meaning to be taken up separately on their own at some later date. They include the temporary transitory accommodations, non-conforming uses and structures, and then design review for commercial zoning districts. Those were all suggested at one point as potential items, but it would require, I think, additional direction from the council if those were to be moved forward or added to the commission's work plan.
Good, thank you. Mr. Whalen.
Thanks. I just had a couple of questions for the committee about their work to date on the annual housing report, as well as the review of the downtown sub-area plan. So can you give us some feedback or a little sense of what your thought is? Because the housing report certainly is going to impact some of the other discussion we have tonight on potential PDDs and residential zones and other tools that may be necessary to achieve the population density target that the countywide planning policies have given to us. So any thoughts just broadly on that? You know, available lands, whether we're heading in the right direction on looking at the PDD as an additional policy to promote in certain areas.
Yeah, for myself, I would say some of the direction is, of course, looking at more density like the PDD,
Right.
and of course the ADU information that's coming up is looking at higher density. And I think that actually is the proper direction for a city to go. Of course, we want to be mindful of how we allow development to happen, but as a kind of a larger idea, I think it's appropriate that we have the density going into the cities rather than in the rural areas. And so, of course, the Growth Management Act is moving us in that direction anyways, but I think that's the appropriate direction that we should be going to. So,
What's your thought, James, on the review of the downtown sub-area plan? You probably have barely touched on that, given the estimated start date, but we spent collectively a lot of work and time and effort on that pre-COVID, and we know that COVID has had an impact on development in the downtown sub-area, but what has been the substance of the review? I see a few apartment complexes that have either been completed or on the way to being completed, but not a lot of commercial development. What's your thought?
right, there's not a lot yet, although the code is, I think it's 18 months old now, so I wouldn't necessarily expect there to be a huge influx just based on this change that we've made. I would say from an architect's perspective, some of the things we've done do make it quite a bit easier. The SEPA already being done and some of those things do make it easier. There's a little pushback or concern about the traffic impacts. I think what we had decided to do was to kind of split the cost of traffic impacts between the city and the developers, and that ends up being a fair amount of money. And so there's concern there, but my own opinion was that was the right decision to make. And so so there's starting to be some money's accumulated, but it's slow, right? And
Do you think that, looking back now that we've had, I know it's only been 18 months, but do you think the development or the transportation mitigation fee, it's a development impact fee as far as I'm concerned.
Mhm.
Do you think it's having an effect on potential development coming in, at least on the commercial side? Not on the mixed housing side, but more on the commercial side.
Right. I haven't actually had developers, I haven't had a lot of developers say this is stopping us from working here. And it's not particularly unique to Lakewood. So University Place has had a transportation impact fee for 10 years, I think. Monty Lake has them. There are several of them around. So developers that develop in the region will be familiar with those. It's just that Lakewood didn't have them in the past. And so that it is new for the people developing in Lakewood.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Brandstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess that I would speak to the committee about the parking lot item of temporary transitory accommodation. That's been, even before COVID, that was something that was being messed around with the state legislature. And there's been a lot more discussion around it at multiple levels about the lack of it since we've gotten into COVID-19. And to the extent that Lakewood, in its location along I-5, I think we are a target area for folks that might want to be establishing these. And so, I would kind of like to see that moved out of the parking lot and some work on it be done in the 2020 work plan, particularly if there is something that we need to do to be proactive in considering all of the impacts of such facilities as opposed to reactive to ones that come into existence or are immediate proposals. So where we're dealing with them in specifics as opposed to dealing with them in just in the policy realm. And I guess I'd ask the committee if they see that they have the wherewithal during this year to take up that parking lot issue.
Anybody on the committee want to take that up?
Sure, James Guerrero, I would say, so, is this specifically related to like RVs coming in and parking for longer periods of time? Is that the gist of the intent here? Temporary transitory accommodations?
I do think that if we're going to start to look into it, we ought to look at it broadly as for what are the types of things that might be proposed that could be, as you mentioned, but could also be something that involves structures.
For myself, I would like us to look at that if we have the time in the schedule.
Any other questions for the committee? Mr. Buer?
Very briefly, this is a topic that staff has been working on behind the scenes. I've had a brief conversation with the city council, or with the city manager on it. I believe he will provide additional information later this evening.
And it's my understanding this is an item that has to pass through the planning commission. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Any other questions? Well, I'd like to thank the commission members for their dedicated service at such high wages. We really appreciate your community involvement and the expertise you bring to the table. It looks like you have another busy schedule this year, but it's nice to have that Title 18A behind you. I know it feels good for us to do that, and I'm sure Mr. Buer appreciates seeing that in the rearview mirror. So thanks again, and we look forward to working with you over the next year. So now we move to a review of the 2020 comprehensive plan and zoning amendment docket. And we have Mr. Buer and Ms. Spear here. Who's taking the lead?
That would be me, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Buer is here to pinch hit for the questions that may come either during or after my presentation. Thanks. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for everyone. Can you see that? I believe you can. So this is also on page 5 of your packet this evening, if you happen to have a hard copy or you're looking at your own screen differently. The 2020 comprehensive plan map and zoning map amendments came to you last December for approval as a docket list. Since then, the Planning Commission has taken a look at this. They held a public hearing, and then they did on May 13th provide a resolution 2020-01 that recommends 9 amendments, which are comprised of 2 text amendments and then 7 map amendments to the comprehensive plan and then the zoning map. Within the packet that you were provided for this evening, you will see a summary table that shows the recommended actions provided by the Planning Commission, a vicinity map that shows all of the amendments where they're located within the city, the language or the map for each amendment, and then a summary table with the public comments received during the Planning Commission's public hearing. And then there was also a summary table provided with what the Planning Commission itself discussed amongst themselves. So in addition to that, there was one letter received after the public hearing record was closed at the Planning Commission, and I believe the same person has or will be submitting something to you at the City Council level regarding one of the amendments. As it sits right now, the council study session is this evening. At this point, the remainder of the schedule is June 1st for a public hearing and then June 15th for action. I am going to now shift over to a, excuse me, shift over to a PowerPoint presentation just to help walk us through this. If I can. Apologies, here I go. Okay. All right. There are 4 questions that the city council decision is based on or has to address before final action is taken. And they are all consistency questions. So whether or not a proposed amendment or revision maintains consistency with comprehensive plan elements or the development regulations, or if not, are they going to be mitigated and so they are consistent? Is it consistent with the goals of the comprehensive plan, with countywide planning policies, and then with the Growth Management Act itself? And with the city staff recommendations coming through to the Planning Commission and then the Planning Commission's recommendation to you, all of the answers to these questions would be yes. The first amendment is a text amendment, and it's titled 2020-01. It is a number of amendments to the comprehensive plan language itself, and the sections are listed there. They all relate to planned development districts. And then there's also a related amendment to a table within the comprehensive plan showing densities allowed in various zones and land use designations within the city. The amendments that we are discussing tonight would be to the residential estate and single family residential zones. And the intent behind those amendments are to achieve consistency with what's currently included within the municipal code at 18A 40-580. And then there's also a new policy being proposed to the comprehensive plan, land use 2.43, encouraging planned development district as a way to maximize the current footprint of the city while also protecting environmental features, critical areas, and conservation of energy and efficiently using open space. Number 2 of the text amendments, which is out of order number-wise, is 2020-09. This is relating to rail policies, and these, for the most part, if not completely, were actually requested originally by city council members. So one of them is to remove a current policy at 18.4, talking about examining potential use for unused or underutilized rail lines. The second is to revise policy number 18.6 to add reference to the Joint Base Lewis McChord. And then third, adding a new policy, T18.10, which is discouraging increased freight traffic along the corridor, given the recent changes since the last time this was touched in the comprehensive plan and the increased freight traffic that's already occurring there. We then move into the 7 map amendments, and you'll see on the screen here, the vicinity map, as I mentioned, it shows the location of all of the various amendments. If it's hard to read the numbers, I'll just quickly go. Number 2 is up here on the corner of Custer and Bridgeport. Number 3 is immediately to the south of that. Number 4 is down closer to actually where the Lakewood Station District Plan is getting developed right now. Number 5 is back up north. It's an odd shaped one, and it's along Steilacoom Boulevard and about 59th Avenue West. Number 6 is down at the bottom here. It's within the Springbrook neighborhood. Number 7 is referring to a single parcel over on Washington and Interlochen. And then number 8 is this long parcel right here. It's a single parcel talking about the Lakewood Station district, or station, excuse me, the building itself. So dang it. The first one of the maps you'll see here is actually referring to 3 parcels. And the way all of these maps are drafted, just for the council's information, takes you out to the center line of the rights of way. But what we're talking about is a rezoning of the parcels themselves. This is just the way our GIS system works. And so we're talking about those 3 parcels that are numbered there, changing them to multifamily, and then the zoning to multifamily 2. This was recommended by the Planning Commission, actually different from what was originally proposed. And this was after discussion with the proponent of it, and multifamily 2 actually worked better for consistency with surrounding parcels, as well as what they were wanting to do with the project in any event. So the recommendation from Commission is to go with multifamily and multifamily 2. Map amendment number 3, as I mentioned, is to immediately to the south of number 2. It's a single parcel, and then all it is changing the zoning, because changing the land use designation. Zoning was already handled in the previous cycle. This is just a scrivener correction to designate the property multifamily. So there would be no change to zoning. This is just to make the land use designation correct. Number 4 relates to 4 different parcels, and it's down, as I mentioned, south close to the Lakewood Station area. It's along 111th, 112th on Bridgeport. The request here, it was city initiated, and it's to rezone and redesignate from commercial to multifamily. In this case, the zone would be multifamily 3, and it was recommended by Planning Commission for approval. So this is a map of the properties that we're talking about. There's 4 parcels in question. The 4th one is very thin. It's in between the 2 over toward the right-hand side, but that is its own parcel you see by the numbers. I'll stop sharing because I noticed that Mr. Brandstetter had his hand up. I didn't know.
Mr. Brandstetter.
Yes. So this one that you've just discussed, that was one that in an earlier time when it was discussed with council, originally included more parcels.
Yes.
Were on the south side of 112, or the north side of 112. And so the recommendation in the docket now just includes those that are not currently commercial properties.
I believe that's correct, unless Mr. Buer knows something different. He's nodding no, so I think that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so continuing, moving to number 5, which is many more parcels than what we've been talking to up to this point. This is the amendment that this time in this cycle got the most public comment. When it was originally proposed by city, it was to rezone a number of parcels, again, in that 59th Avenue West and Silicon Boulevard area, from neighborhood business district to high density multifamily, and from neighborhood commercial zone to multifamily 1. And the thought process behind this is it's been a while since it was zoned the neighborhood business district, but there hadn't been a lot of commercial development, and there's been interest and from the council and then direction from the state continuing to grow, I think, for additional densification within city boundaries. After the conversation at the Planning Commission's public hearing, there was a number of people wanting to either keep it the same or find a different zone besides multifamily 1. The Planning Commission actually looked at 4 different zones as potentials for this one, including arterial residential commercial, multifamily 1 and multifamily 2, as well as, again, keeping it at NC2. By the end of the discussion, there was a recommendation that came from the Planning Commission to go with redesignating all of the parcels multifamily and rezoning them to multifamily 2 rather than 1. And what this does is allow those that have expressed interest in developing in the very near future to do what they thought they were going to be able to do. It maintains a higher density. And then there's, I believe, that public comment that's going to be coming to you was one of the property owners objecting to earlier versions of this recommendation are now saying that they are satisfied with this proposal's recommendation from the commission. So again, this is this weird shaped parcel, just given how they're located on a number of different streets coming together at the intersection. But you see along the north side of Stillicum, and then there's that kind of triangular piece or arrow shaped piece over towards the east side of Stillicum Boulevard Southwest. And then there's a couple of parcels south of Gravelly Lake Drive Southwest. So I won't go into a great deal about this, but this is an example of the things that the Planning Commission looked at to develop their recommendation to you. It was taking a look at all of the uses within those 4 different zones I mentioned and figuring out what would be allowed or not allowed, what would be allowed to remain as a legal non-conforming use if it was already existing, those types of conversations, looking at all the various types of uses, commercial, industrial, as well as residential. And by the end of the conversation, it was to go with the multifamily 2. Number 6 is the Springbrook neighborhood, and somewhat ironically, it was also called number 6 last year when this was first raised and considered by the Planning Commission. This is the Springbrook neighborhood, whether or not to rezone it, originally requested by the City Council now several years ago. And then what was occurring last year and is still occurring now is the City of Lakewood has gone to FEMA. The city has commissioned a new updated version of the floodplain mapping in this area of the city. The initial comments and maps have gone back to FEMA now for review and finalization as part of their mapping process for the whole city. We're just not at the final steps yet. And so as it sits right now, the Planning Commission is recommending that this wait one more year and move forward into the 2021 amendment package, because at that point, the council, the Planning Commission, and the public will all have access to the finalized, completed FEMA maps as updated based on the work that the planning or the Public Works Department commissioned. So very quickly, I know Mr. Boki has his hand raised, so I'll stop sharing, but right here, these are the parcels we're talking about. And I will stop for council questions.
Mr. Volkey, and I have to apologize, when screen sharing's up, I can't see everybody at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Hey, Tiffany, given now that we're waiting on the federal government, we kind of know that the flood map's either going to change or expand, or I'm not, but we know that we kind of know the results really already. Shouldn't we be considering interim regulations on these parcels rather than have someone plop in tomorrow with hey, I want to build whatever they're zoned for in their apartments, and then we have to go, well, it's, and do that battle. I mean, wouldn't it be better for us to write some interim regulations and put them in, basically doing what we're planning to do, rather than kind of fight a battle that we already know what we don't want in there?
That's certainly one option. I'm going to turn to Mr. Buer in just a second, but my initial reaction, Mr. Boki, is that interim regulations have a life of 6 months and then they have to be reviewed again. And if you were to do that, say, next week, a year from now, we would be potentially talking about a second renewal, or we would be talking about the 2021 comprehensive plan amendments. I don't know the number of current planning projects that have been applied for or discussed with that side of the house, which is why I'm now going to turn to Mr. Buer.
There wasn't one application for a multifamily apartment complex. However, because of all the rules and regulations surrounding the flood zone, that application is no longer valid and is not being pursued. At the moment, there are no other multifamily apartment type applications in that part of Springbrook. I will also tell you that we received active requests from industrial clients talking about how to develop this in the future. They seem to be not too concerned with the floodplain issues. We do have an upcoming meeting here next week with one person. But I would also point out that Tiffany is accurate in her description of interim regulations. They do have a life shelf. It's not very long. And is that something that the council wants to do? If the answer is yes, we can propose it.
Well, what was the Planning Commission looking at before the staff made the recommendation? Let's just wait until, which I think is the correct recommendation, right? Let's wait until the federal government gives us a final determination. What was going to be the plan?
Well, if the council, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Buer.
The initial plan was to look at this for industrial development, in part because of the gravel pit and a high interest in the use of the gravel pit for industrial development. And the new street, for example, on 123rd was actually built to heavy commercial standards. And so we seem to be moving in that direction. But I just have some concern about proposing an industrial designation and not knowing exactly what the outlook is going to be. We'd also anticipated having a decision by FEMA at this time, and that did not take place, I think in part because of the pandemic. So we're hopeful that we can get a decision later this summer.
I guess my concern is that we're more than a year out on us finalizing next year's comp plan amendments, I guess, right? A year from now, we'll be reviewing what they've worked on. So, now you're talking fall of 2021, and a lot of, I was going to say a lot of water will go under the bridge, but a lot of things could happen and that are really incompatible with what we're trying to do there. Or what we, rather than what we're trying to do, I would just say, and I stated this before in relation to the one proposal that was coming for the multifamily, was I just don't think it's right that we should be building housing in flood zones so that when there's a flood, you've got these victims, right? And so I guess what's to prevent that from happening between now and next year?
Mr. Bucky, I don't have a good answer right now, but that's something that we could come back with some additional explanation.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Before I go to Ms. Farmer, I'd just like to add that me too to Mr. Bulkey's comment. If you look at the apartment complex that's down the street close to the creek there, you can just look at it and tell it shouldn't be there. And if something floods, it's going to be underwater, and the government's going to have to pay all sorts of flood insurance, and then somebody's going to want to rebuild there. So if we can avoid situations like that, I think it'd be good. Ms. Farmer.
And I'll echo those comments. I grew up in Kelso in a floodplain. And when the mountain blew, we were evacuated 3 times. And the government ended up making some changes after that. And so it happens, and mountains blow up and that sort of thing. I had a question about the connection between the floodplain designation and property insurance and flood insurance. Not quite sure how that works. And if that was a driving factor, because I see a lot of notes about it.
If your structure is located within a 100-year floodplain, you are subject to flood insurance. That's the short answer. And there have been changes to Lakewood's flood maps over the last 20 years. Sections that are in the floodplain were not in the floodplain up until about 2017. And so we've had to make some adjustments for those who live or reside around adjacent to Clover Creek. That is the primary area affected by some of the recent changes. When this industrial proposal was first submitted, there seemed to be some inaccurate information about the floodplain, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense. And just some background for Ms. Farmer. At that point in time, the Public Works Director, Paul Busich, suggested that we contact FEMA, but before doing so, we would go ahead and do some research work on the floodplain. We were anticipating that the result of that work would be that the floodplain would be smaller than what the 2017 map showed. But that was just the opposite of what happened. The floodplain area got larger. And then some issues came up with the canal, with the banks along Clover Creek as well in the Springbrook neighborhood. So we have done the engineering work and have submitted an application for clarification of the floodplain boundaries in the Springbrook neighborhood, as well as along Clover Creek, south of 112th. We have been waiting for an answer. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Branstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I share some of Mr. Bulkey's concerns, and I would prefer to not move this into next year, but to actually go ahead and make the industrial designation in this cycle, because that, given that it would take interim regulations and 2 extensions to get to the same place if we kick it a year, that, we already have a vision for what is reasonable to do that. We've already looked at the housing data that tells us that we don't need units in this particular geographical location because of the arrangement that we have made for units through one sub-area plan and the projected next area plan. And in the amendment that's proposed just immediately before this, there along Steilacoom Boulevard, which is going to add density into the city to do that. And we saw that things can come up and get vested in less than a year. Somebody comes up with something. We went through that with the downtown sub-area plan and the 1 apartment complex that worked very hard to get vested days before new regulations would come into place. I think that we already know that if not every parcel, almost all those parcels are invest in the long term to become industrial, commercial. It's kind of like Woodbrook, of where we did that rezoning well ahead of time so that there were no surprises, even though there wasn't something immediately on there. I would certainly like to do that, and and move forward with actually making a zoning designation change to do that. And if that means that when after the public hearing, if it comes up for consideration that we would need an amendment to be able to move from the docket as it exists with a current presentation, then I would at least like to see that and set ourselves on the course that we know we want to be on anyway.
Any other questions on this? And can you proceed?
Will do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So number 7 is a map amendment as well. And this is one that was actually something we should have caught early on. This is a staff error. This is a single parcel. And as a result, it should have been treated as a site-specific rezone under 18A30.680 and .790. So the Planning Commission has recommended that number 7 just be removed from the docket altogether. What it was going to do was talk about rezoning the single parcel in the corner of Washington Boulevard and Interlochen to mixed residential, which I believe is what the either planned or constructed development on that property is going to be or has been planned to be. So I'll stop sharing just for a second in case there's any questions on that one. All right, I will continue. Thank you. Number 8 is rezoning the, it's actually 2 parcels here. It looks like one, but it's actually 2 because there's one that's very skinny again. This is taking the Lakewood Transit Station and rezoning it and redesignating it to public institutional, simply because that's what it is. And the Planning Commission really forwarded this without much discussion. They agreed as well. And so there you see the map. You've got the two parcels here immediately adjacent. So number 9, we talked about already in some detail. These are some changes to the rail policies that were initiated by council request last fall. All updating and making a little more accurate given the current activity along the freight corridors within Lakewood, the policies under the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. And one more time, where we're at in terms of timing as of now is tonight's the study session. A week from now would be, or next Monday, I should say, is a public hearing, and then action potentially on the 15th. And I will stand down for questions.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Ms. Spear and Mr. Buer. And we'll move on to the next item of business, which is a review of potential use of coronavirus relief funds.
And I'm sorry.
Yes.
What I'm going to actually do is bring in a couple of other city staff people, unless it looks like it's already happening thanks to the city clerk. I'll be quiet about that. What we're going to do is have me take the lead, but there are other involved staff people I'd like to recognize in developing this recommendation packet to you regarding how the city might spend the $1.79 million that have now been identified for the city of Lakewood of COVID relief funds. Becky Newton, the Economic Development Manager, Brian Humphreys, the Human Services Coordinator, and then Jeff Gum, the Planning Manager, who you're well familiar with the Rental Housing Safety Program and the CDBG home funding, were also key in providing this information for tonight's discussion. So we're going to go to within your packet, this is on page 58. And so I'm gonna get down there really quickly. The question that was presented, and as you all know, probably better than anybody on staff, this is a quickly moving target with a lot of various buckets of dollars, which are potentials for the city of Lakewood to utilize and take advantage of. But the question that we're talking about tonight is how to spend specifically the COVID relief funds, which are coming out of the state's award of CARES funding. And the reason it's 1.79 million is it's based on a $30 per capita formula that the state developed, and Lakewood's population of about 60,000 resulted in that number. The criteria in terms of using these monies, first and foremost, it's a short time frame. It is somewhat retroactive, meaning once the contracts are in place with the Department of Commerce who are administering this program, there's going to be the ability to go back to March 1 of this year, and then the expenditures must be secured by October 31st. The reimbursement requests need to be submitted to Commerce by November 15th of this year. There's 3 main criteria and then a little more detail provided here. First of all, it's a necessary expenditure due to the public health emergency. Secondly, it's costs not accounted for in the March 27th, 2020 budget. And third, it's those costs incurred again in that time frame between March 1st and October 31st of this year. Allowable expenditures, medical and public health expenses, payroll expenses related to dealing with, mitigating, responding to COVID-19, facilitating compliance with public health measures, associated with the provision of economic support to third parties, and then any other that satisfy those criteria. The Department of Commerce put together a 5-part question and answer of ourselves. And if all of the answers to the 5 bullets here is true, then the expense in essence will qualify. So first of all, is it connected to COVID? Is it a necessary expense? Is it not used to fill shortfall to cover an expenditure that would otherwise not have qualified under the CARES Act? The expense wouldn't exist without COVID, or it would have been for a substantially different purpose. And again, it was not something included in the budget. So if all of those are answered yes or true, then it is a eligible expense under these dollars. The initial paperwork from Commerce has been received by the city, and once that gets turned around back to them, they are committing to having an online process that will be quick. Normally they're saying 7 to 10 days, but if this online process has happened, reimbursement could happen even faster than that. So starting on page 60 of your packet, you'll see use of CARES Act table, and you can see that in detail there. A couple of things I'd like to point to before I jump back over to a PowerPoint is that there are some things that need to happen regardless. First and foremost, because this is uncharted territory in some respects, there's going to have to be a lot of interaction and coordination with Lakewood Finance in order to make sure that the administration of these dollars happens correctly. And as it stands, there's money that the city could be receiving and using itself. There's also money that could be administered and granted out by the Lakewood City to either individuals and or organizations. So all of that needs to be planned as well as possible in advance. The second thing would be prioritization of some of the things that are listed below in what we're going to go through in a moment. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a preliminary question. It concerned me that I'm a great disbeliever in peanut buttering, but it concerned me that the numbers here are particularly arbitrary. Half internal, half external. Of the external, half business, half human services. What effort was made to prioritize the need and to determine what services and funding are available for those needs coming from outside sources so that we fill a gap as opposed to just cutting a pie up and passing it out?
There was effort, first and foremost, to double check whether or not we were, in essence, double dipping, meaning giving to organizations or ideas of organizations that would already be receiving money. And the intent throughout this is not to do so. The intent would be to make sure before either an individual was receiving rent assistance, for instance, or a business was receiving some sort of economic sustainability loan, that they weren't already getting money somewhere else for that same purpose. Other than that, that's part of why this is brought before you, was to set those priorities. There was some preliminary conversation among staff members along with the city manager to develop this budget and provide it to you, but it's by no means set in stone. And if the council wants to change that, please do.
But I guess my question there was, what came first, the chicken or the egg? It's like somebody cut a pie in quarters and then decided what went inside the pieces, as opposed to saying, what are our priorities? What's the need? How are we going to prioritize that funding?
I don't know if the manager wants to jump in here, but I guess we are at the point of chicken and egg. And so trying to provide information for you tonight, we did what we could as a first step, but anticipated that the council would want to maybe look at this, change it as much as you like. We're not by any means strongly held to any of these numbers or these percentages of allocation.
Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, I would echo what Ms. Spears said. You know, when we received notification that we received these monies, you know, first and foremost, we thought that the monies were going to be made available to help the city in terms of our financial distress. We very quickly learned that that was not the case. However, as we began looking at the criteria, you know, one of the first things that we did was we reached out through community collaboration within our social and human services network to see if there was a need there. That was an organization or a number of organizations actually that provided some tremendous feedback over the last month and a half, almost 2 months actually. And you can see the areas that they identified in terms of what the need is. The business assistance, that came from the fact that we have heard on a very regular and routine basis from this body, particularly through the COVID CDBG funding process, that providing assistance to local businesses, even though it's not going to go a long way, given the number of businesses we have, is something that that you folks want to do. So that was another area that very, very quickly rose to the top. And then the monies that are being recommended to be allocated to the city, we had a team that actually went through and identified, okay, what is it that we need in the short, medium, and actually even long term as it relates to a near future or a long-term COVID outbreak? And so that's where that came from. Though a smaller portion of it is allocated in the current months where we are right now, where we're reacting to it. And then as far as, so that was actually based on, a budget that 48%. As far as, the breakdown between, human services and business assistance. Yeah, that was, a split, but, it was about, came out to an available funding source of 900,000. And so we made the decision to split it equally.
Right,
Okay, I'll continue then.
please.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Haha, I found you. Okay. So some of this we've already walked through. We've walked through this. We've walked through the test. Just one thing that came out when the U.S. Treasury and then Commerce provided additional information to cities as they prepared to plan how these monies might be spent is that grants can be made to small businesses and they can also be made to individuals. And so within the recommendations, as you see, and as the mayor was just pointing out, there is number of dollars intended to go to other entities besides the city itself for use. Within your packet tonight, you do have a draft resolution, which is again subject to whatever change the council might direct, but it has funding priorities identified. First of all, to create some sort of reserve in order to be ready should something unanticipated will happen. And we are assuming that something unanticipated will happen. I'll start over. Unanticipated will happen, which is why the reserve is recommended. Individual and family economic resilience. So given that individuals can receive dollars out of this fund, the idea is to partner with community partnership or collaboration partners and distribute dollars for whether it be rental support or other sort of economic assistance directly to people who live in the city of Lakewood. Another priority would be business assistance. And so again, either as a city itself doing the administration or working with public or private partners that would then further provide the money to others. Have financial assistance and training available for current businesses within the city and maybe potential businesses who are looking to locate here, or perhaps it's a business that needs to close under its current model and they want to reopen doing something else. And then the other final bucket would be the vital government services, which is what the city might be doing on its own with the dollars that it might allocate. And I saw Mr. Bransetter's hand go up.
Mr. Branstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess that, in the table that's in our packet, there are certain percentage of the money for this, a certain percentage of the money for that going through. But in the actual action that's proposed for the council to take, there is no quantification of dollars or percentages of dollars for any specific need. That just establishes the priorities that are on your screen. So in what way would it be envisioned for the council, as you mentioned earlier, to try to move those priorities around in terms of what should get a more robust amount of dollars, what should be a lower priority with a lower quantity of dollars, given the way that the resolution is structured.
The resolution is intended simply to identify priorities, saying here is the full amount of money that the city has received, and this is where the council would direct attention be put. And then going forward from that would be a separate conversation, and ultimately it may be an ordinance that may need to be developed, or it may be administrative work given direction from council to allocate specific dollars. I think there's going to be separate and apart from this resolution, an ordinance that might include this is how much goes to each one of these various things once we understand from council what the priorities are and how much of the percentage of each, the budget that you have in front of you as a draft. However, that would change, that would be reflected in a separate ordinance for action.
So I guess that I would appreciate there being a special ordinance before we begin to authorize the spending of money, particularly the spending of money by agencies that are external. I think that there are expenses that we're incurring now internally that we are going to want to use these dollars under the essential services that we're providing to be able to go and do. I guess I'm having trouble giving our meeting schedule of June 1st and then June 15th. How are we going to be able to do that quickly if we have a resolution just establishing priorities and then we need an ordinance further on to be actually slice up the pie, as the mayor would say?
Well, staff would be reacting to your comments this evening, Mr. Brandstetter and council. So if there's direction tonight to either amend the budget as presented to you, as well as give better direction than what staff has provided to you, you react to that, give us a little more detail. We would be drafting an ordinance for your review at your next meeting if you wanted to do it that way, or we would move another 2 weeks on.
Okay, I guess that my question for the mayor is it your intent for us to go through and discuss the percentages that are in the presentation today and provide some guidance to staff, or is that something that we're going to put off for a week, or how do you envision orchestrating that?
I think tonight we could discuss some general parameters, not dollar amounts, where people's priorities are. And I guess to take a lead on that, one of my concerns is that some things may be duplicated and some things may be, as a result of either that or the fact that other programs exist, unnecessary. For example, and they fall mostly in, I'd call it the human services category. The city of Tacoma has a rental assistance program. The county has a rental assistance program. The folks who are receiving government benefits before, whether it's disability payments, Section 8 subsidy, SNAP, TANF, had their benefits uninterrupted. So there may be need, but it's not really related to COVID. There's an effort by a lot of social service agencies to try to tap into enhance programs unrelated to COVID. I think that we have to look out for. Unemployment compensation has been mucked up by the state. I don't know that our aid would get there any sooner by the time they get that out. But if you're making $75,000 or less through the end of July, you will make more money on unemployment than you will if you work. And so there isn't a need there related to COVID that isn't taken care of. People will really need jobs when they return more than anything. They have to have an employer to come back to, or you get all the negative social impacts of having people unemployed, whether it's enhanced domestic violence, behavioral health issues, crime, all sorts of things go with high unemployment rate that are undesirable. And it's a big strain on the social services for long term, which may be avoided if you can enhance jobs. There are pockets that we could perhaps backfill. I mean, there's some of the training programs at the two-year institutions require hours to get certification. People had the hours that they have to put in interrupted. And some of them have a hole, whether it's in between semesters, living expenses, or having to pay tuition again. So the GI Bill has kind of been modified in its application for the folks that had military benefits, but I'm sure with two-year institutions, we might have a hole there. I think on the social services side, rather than giving more money to a food bank, which is, everybody's top of mind, the food banks have food. They have more of a supply chain problem and a volunteer manpower problem than a food problem or money problem. We can try to look for those holes in the social service side and plug the holes, or rechannel more of an emphasis on trying to preserve jobs for people to come back to. So, Mr. Whalen.
Hello, let me see here. You hear me now? Well, just a couple of comments. I really appreciate the staff's first stab effort at this, because we're all kind of working to do what we can with the resources we're provided. And this is a bit of, I don't want to say largesse, but all of this gets to be a bit of largesse coming from the federal government. I think it's a bit rushed. I feel like I'm a motor officer back on around September 10th, trying to spend everything before the end of the fiscal year without really analyzing the true need. And so I would suggest we take a bit more time, if we can, to take this good work that staff has provided to us and chew on a little bit with better input from some of the social service providers. To me, I think ultimately the best category of use is going to be resiliency, both internally for the city as well as externally for our businesses and some of the social service agencies that have gaps that we can fill. I mean, to me, that's the best use of the money, is to leverage those gaps that need filling and aren't otherwise filled by other monies from the county or the federal government directly. So from a resiliency standpoint, from the internal needs, I think the proposed retrofitting of City Hall and city facilities to be better prepared the next time for something like this is probably a good idea, whether it's the touchless features, the plexiglass shields, better technology. I think I would be supportive of that. The 175 grand for PPE, I know we're not focused on particular dollar amounts tonight, but it seems to me that that eventually should be budgeted for us in our next biennial budget down the road. I think these monies should be used to better enhance and coordinate with public partners and our local businesses. So I guess what I'm saying is I think we need more time. I think we're on the right track with the great staff work, but I think, we need more time to sit down together and have better data and input. I find these Zoom meetings incredibly difficult to really get a handle on much and to discuss stuff as openly as we normally do. And I think this is too big of a chunk of change for us to, give it short shrift. I think we got to do it deliberately.
Mr. Mayor, if I could respond just briefly. I'm going to ask Brian Humphreys to respond to some extent on the questions regarding social services input. But just to point out to you as well that they were engaged through at least 2 of their meetings. And then there's actually notes starting on page 65 of your packet from their May 13th meeting where this was discussed in more detail. But I'm going to unmute Brian and see if he has anything more to add.
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. I could talk your ear off for an hour about this. I absolutely will not do that. But the purpose of those last two virtual collaboration meetings in particular have been to, as best as we can, know we're flying blind because so many families are cut off, especially high needs families, to try to assess what the needs in the community are, what they think we will be, and try to figure out who is already meeting those needs and who is probably going to be meeting those needs. So we're pretty confident that no new needs have arisen or will arise. This has exacerbated existing needs in the community, the economic resilience in particular, but domestic violence and substance abuse is something absolutely. We had 30 organizations on both calls. That is something absolutely everyone is talking about. And the other one is youth mental health, just the experience of quarantine, but also the extended summer learning loss they're going to experience. And our response to that, and also the request to those organizations, was to help us be highly, highly collaborative. So who's already doing what? How can we understand where the gaps are and not be redundant? So for instance, we know that the city of Tacoma already funded a rental assistance program. And hopefully, if we were to take these monies and use at least some of it for rental assistance, we would partner with the organizations already doing that. So the city subcontracts to 3 organizations. One of the benefits of that is they have a data sharing agreement, so they can ensure that families are not double dipping, and they can also control where applications are coming from. So if we work with those 3 organizations, LASA, Share and Care, and Metropolitan Development Council, they can take care of the Lakewood families for us. And there's a lot of logistical things we can do with that. My question to the organizations already addressing domestic violence with therapy and advocacy, who have already moved their services online, was this one: like, to what degree do you already have the resources you need to meet the need when things open up? If you do, then I'd like to recommend putting more dollars towards economic resilience. If you're telling me there's a need in this space, that there's a huge gap coming starting when the quarantine's over, then that's why that's remained a priority. And the same thing with youth. We also said the school district is going to take the lead, communities and schools, YMCA, Boys and Girls Club. You all tell me what's going on and where the gaps are going to be, and then we'll fill it in there. And the school district is still trying to figure out what they're doing. And this is also why you see that access to food is on there relatively small right now, because our understanding was that the county was going to take a lot of their money and put a lot of it towards the food bank. So we said, okay, if the county is going to fund the food bank, then those are going to end up serving Lakewood families. We can put more money towards economic resilience. So as I said, I could go on and on and on about this, but we are doing our best to understand the needs, the gaps, and collaborate as best we can.
Well, let me address that. I appreciate it, Brian, because frankly, going on and on and on would maybe be helpful, especially if we were all together, because I think we get a better sense of really what you've heard and sense from the organization. It's tough to get a real flavor for it from words on a paper, to be honest. I appreciate your stories and hearing from the organizations. With regard to the rent assistance, I think there's critical need for that. But when I talked to Victoria Woodards in Tacoma, one of the unique pieces that Tacoma was doing was not necessarily giving the rent assistance directly to the tenants, but they were giving it to the landlords to ensure that the rent got to the right spot. What is your thought about that with regard to a program?
Absolutely. I put that in the recommendation I had for this committee, that we have a reimbursement model with partners, so that we're not paying it directly ourselves, and that we're also not collecting any personal identifiable information from these families, and that also that obviously they have to document a loss of income due to COVID, and that they pay it directly to a tenant or to the landlord or something like that. And the other thing that we're considering that I'm still not sure how to move forward on, but we are thinking about, is how many families are receiving, this sounds a little heartless, but it needs to be thought about, who is receiving the enhanced unemployment benefits right now, who are going to have a job on August 1st and really may not need our help, but do need financial coaching to make sure they do not make poor decisions in this time. So that is one of the things that we've done with both of our collaboration meetings. What are the financial coaching resources? How do we make those available? So Sound Outreach, Goodwill, and United Way have all provided me good resources, and we're trying to make those available, but also trying to understand how many families might be eligible for unemployment, but have been caught up in this whole mess, and it's just not being processed for them, and they're falling behind. Of those families, how many of them are close to receiving benefits? But all that to say, yes. Now, if you talk to Victoria Woodard, Mayor Woodard, one thing we talked about is their restrictions for the rental assistance were up to $1,000 and 50% of the area median income. I would recommend more than $1,000 a month just to make a difference for a family. And I would also go higher than 50% AMI, because then you're also not worried about overlapping. No one is funding anyone more than 50% AMI, and definitely not more than 80%. But there are a lot of families, 100, 120, maybe even 150% area median income, who have legitimately lost income, and they could use some rental assistance. So I would change those parameters if we were to do something like that.
The proper program for that.
All right.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Brian. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to continue with the presentation, or would you like to keep going like this? Okay.
Oh, Mr. Branstetter has a question. Late hand.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a couple of comments along this vein, and I would say that October 31st is a ways away, and I think that the need for resilience payments to individuals or families, given the fact that there are some federal programs, particularly unemployment, that may or may not continue beyond the end of July. I think there are some people who have lost jobs that the job isn't going to be there to go back, and those would be folks that we would want to look to target where they've lost, they no longer have the safety net that was there up to that point in time and going back. But I had a chance to talk with some small business owners who are trying to open back up, people with retail stores and things. Some automobile repair folks, and because of the generous unemployment benefits, they have been placed in the situation of their employees do not want to come back before, at this point, late July. And so they're struggling to try to open up with only some employees that have come back to be able to go and do that. And I don't think that we want to exasperate that situation for businesses. I certainly would like to both, if we're going to do rental assistance, pay it to landlords, because we want landlords to both stay in business and continue to maintain their properties. And two, I think there's a greater percentage of dollars that can go to help more businesses get back on their feet and get started, that in the long run will help employees and move forward going on. And I'd certainly be supportive of funding a viable plan for mental health and learning gap things. If the school district can come up with something that's viable that we can be a contributor to.
Right, Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So once again, I'm just jumping back into this to work our way through the rest of the logic. We already talked about the needs for the coordination with the finance department, as well as the prioritization by the council of the ideas being presented. Some overall costs that were identified were the payroll expenses for city employees who are either working completely or partially on COVID-19 response, the administration and resource coordination for these grant dollars, and also making sure that city departments are going to be working with each other internally to make sure that the money is spent in the most efficient way. Worst case scenario, you have a bunch of different departments all separately ordering PPE items, for instance, when they could all be doing it at once. And then again, determining how much of a reserve the city council might want to keep for things yet to come. Technology, this is used by the city itself. So making sure hardware, software, and training is available for staff, both at home if they're teleworking or if they have to do for instance, off-site permanent inspections or code enforcement. And then also the retrofits, which were mentioned by Councilmember Whalen, to the council chambers, as well as others, to allow for safe virtual and or in-person meetings going forward. Facilities, retrofitting City Hall and other buildings to be safe again, both for the public and for the people that work there. The idea of having some signage external to buildings or in open spaces, parks, etc. Deep cleaning and that sort of thing as well. And then the personal protective equipment that might be needed right now as well as into the future. For instance, the coming night market or farmers market or other future events where PPE might be needed by staff as well as by attendees. And then where to store that stuff. How would that be stockpiled? And then we get into the coordination with the public partners. Some of this has already happened. So for instance, early on, there was some assistance by Lakewood and the LPD to Western State Hospital, getting that reimbursed. Coordinating with other local governments and non-governmental organizations regarding regional loan programs or grants to businesses. And then other public partners such as West Pierce Fire and Rescue, which the city understands will not be receiving any COVID dollars. Utilities within the city, public libraries, the base. Clover Park School District is certainly needing, we need to coordinate with them, but they are receiving money. So it's more a matter of just the staff time that might be dedicated to that work. So far in Pierce County, and I know Mr. Boki and the mayor would be aware of this already, but there's dollars that have been allocated and are continuing to be allocated weekly or regularly by Pierce County to various buckets: public health emergency, economic stabilization and recovery, community response, and essential government services. So somewhat similar to what's been presented to the city council tonight. The way they have broken out their human services dollars, food and nutrition, housing stability, domestic violence prevention, transportation, veteran services, behavioral health services, and child and family services. And this again is moving very fast. The county is working through this right now with applications for support for these activities. Business assistance, helping with the businesses that are in existence right now, with training, with materials that might help them navigate through some of the financial tools they could seek on their own but may not be aware of, and making sure that that's available in multiple languages. Providing PPE supplies. I know that the county has put together a number of supply packages available to city and county businesses, and just something that Lakewood could partner with them to make sure that happens in Lakewood. And then providing grants and or low or zero interest loans for small and low income businesses for either lost revenue or expenses related to COVID-19. And then payments to businesses not wanting to, again, repeat what they may already be receiving if they're low income. Training and direct payments to individuals and businesses to start a new business if they have to close one that is maybe temporarily closed now, if they make that a permanent decision. Creating a business inquiry portal. So this is for potential businesses coming into Lakewood, as well as those that might be pivoting to a new direction. And then there may be a need to try to make sure that not just black and white business, maybe creative economy, maybe some artists or other types of work in the longer term would need some assistance. Human services was just discussed quite a bit, but there were 4 subcategories voiced by the Community Collaboration Partnership: the individual and family need, the domestic violence and substance abuse support, youth mental health, and then the access at food banks. So this is the budget that's been referred to by several of the council members already, but the way it was presented for you tonight to start to look at, it's a total of just over 1.79 million. And then it's the way staff has separated it for your consideration would be the internal use, the external use, and of course, all of these numbers and categories are subject to your direction. So I'll stop there one more time. And I just wanted to ask Becky if she had anything she wanted to add regarding the economic development piece.
Thanks, Tiffany. So I would just add that we tried to look at all possibilities and talking to a lot of the businesses, a lot of businesses who are fairly savvy have figured out the PPP and were able to get loans and assistance. And so it's more about when you're thinking about businesses, it's the small guys, the smaller businesses, the local businesses that, and particularly those that are potentially need some language, have some language barriers. So thinking about how do we reach out to all of the businesses and provide assistance across the board, particularly to those that are low income. And also in some of the businesses I've talked to, really they need assistance with rent and utilities, some of the basic things just to keep going. And some of them have also are thinking about closing or have already closed and perhaps need to pivot to either a different occupation or a similar business, but a little bit different from what they're doing. As an example, a mobile pet grooming group has decided that they had to close their business, so they wanted to move it home. And then as the mayor had suggested, thinking about education and training programs that it can also help businesses to adapt to the new economies and so forth will be important. And so I would just say that in thinking about simplifying it, since we potentially already have a loan program put in place by the city council, maybe adding to that, maybe there are other things that we can add to that program to support business rather than reinventing, a new program as an example. And a lot of those things, what we're thinking about is what can we do now in terms of infrastructure to help businesses going forward, to not only those that have the language barriers, what kind of communications do we need to put in place to help alleviate these issues going forward and to prepare for other situations such as this in the future.
And just I'm sorry.
Mr. Whalen.
Becky, thank you for your comments. I had a question for you when you were putting together the business assistance portion of this. What are you hearing from our commercial tenants or commercial landlords about, their needs, but for maybe 1 or 2 months of commercial rental assistance or deferral, that they would perhaps be able to kind of stick with it or stay in business? And I'm thinking about, just off the top of my head, the barbecue pizza. I may be incorrect, but I heard that they may not come back even though they started their tenant improvement work.
Right. I haven't heard lately what their situation is. I believe that they had asked for a refund of their fees because they have had considered not moving forward. But the last time I looked, they were still working on their space. And so we're hopeful that they'll still continue.
The rental fees for my day job might be an area, I know that you've kind of directed that a little bit generally to businesses, but one that provides some sort of rental relief or specific to paying perhaps landlords who are being beset with various bequests for rental, either forgiveness or deferral on the commercial side, might really be helpful to keep the businesses up and running, especially if they got PPP loans to be able to, keep payroll afloat.
Absolutely. And so a lot of folks are renegotiating their leases.
Right.
A lot of that going on. RPAI is in the process of renegotiating all of their leases.
Okay.
However, they also said that none of the businesses are currently planning on closing permanently. So that's a good sign. I don't know of any businesses within the town center in terms of the actual mall that are intending to close permanently. So that's a good sign. But there is the rent and utilities is a big deal, as you mentioned. Either they want a deferral on the rent, renegotiating those. So those are definitely key hot issues for not only the landlord but the tenant.
as I think it was Mr. Branscombe pointed out, we have till October 31st to actually spend the money. As Mr. William pointed out, probably don't have enough information to make definite decisions on allocation at this point. I would suggest that we have a phase plan where we take an increment of this money and keep it flexible so that we don't put something into an ordinance that particularly divides it up by percentage or dollar figure until we actually allocate it. But going back to almost grade school, junior high journalism, the questions we have are the who, what, why, when, how. And we know when. We have to spend it by October 31st. Who's eligible for a particular program. You can't figure that out until you know what the program is. So the questions we have to have answered really are, what do we want to do? Which items of expense? Why? And the why is there duplication? Is there a need? You know, we're low on the food chain. The feds have programs, state has programs, county has programs, and we have a little bit left over. So we're going to want to use that wisely for a place there's an actual need. And then the how is this like our loan program where directly from the city, or do we have an existing partner that's providing a service that we want to enhance, and we enhance their human services contract? How are you going to deliver the money or service to them? So I think it would be helpful coming back if we had that what, why, and how. And I think things as they're opening up are going to change. For example, I was on a call with the governor today. They really don't know what they're going to do for the next phase and the exact timing, and they kind of make up the conditions as they go along and react, very reactionary. And so our businesses aren't going to know what tools they need to open back up. And that may be what we want to spend money on, and we don't even know it yet. But those things are going to change in the next couple of weeks. And I think as Mr. Branstad pointed out, there are going to be needs at the end of July. I think that's where we're going to have probably greater need for social services if the feds cut off the enhanced unemployment. So I'd solicit comments from others, but I think we should kind of move cautiously because we aren't the big guys. And we pick out some of the city things. That's a different issue. But I'd like to see where we can put our finger in the dike on these other things. And I'd like to see it metered out instead of a rush. Some of those, somebody made a point too about the rental, I think it was Mr. Humphreys, the criteria for rental assistance. Counties is going to be different than the city of Tacoma. Tacoma had some social goals that they incorporated in theirs that the county isn't going to do. I think the county is going to have more liberal criteria as far as qualification, higher percentage of area income. So, but we don't know where those things are falling right now. Ms. Farmer.
I echo some of the sentiments that I've heard. I want to thank staff for all the effort putting in. There are a lot of questions and a lot of things to consider, so I really appreciate the time that you put in. To several points that have already been made, I know that other governments have programs, and I don't want to take for granted that people are getting what they need just because those programs exist, because all of the eligibility requirements are different. And so I think we have a critical need to figure out where the gaps are. And I really appreciate the finger in the dike comment. I think we could really help fill a gap here and there and take that regional approach. I am interested in looking at some of those proposed expenses in the overall category with coordination issues, language translation services. The state is offering a master contract for language translation. My state agency is loaning out a person for small business assistance 3 days a week through the EOC. Training for teleworking, those resources largely exist. Small business, yeah. So I think there are some opportunities still to pursue. Overall, I'd love to see a higher percentage spent externally rather than internally. So I will have further questions about any retrofits and that sort of thing. So circling back again to the need for more data. I certainly don't want to wait until October because I really, all the notes that I took in reading these materials really point to a need in July once the federal unemployment extra assistance stops. So more data. Thank you.
Mr. Volkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in agreement with the moving up the ladder a little bit on the area median income. 50% is very low, but I think in the market that we're in, the rental market that we're in, 80%, people at 80% of AMI are using a big chunk of their income to try to pay rent. And we probably have a lot of folks in that 50 to 80% range. So I'm in agreement with Mr. Humphreys on that. I think that that's a good idea. Where the number should be, between 50 and 100, I'll leave that up to staff. Just so we know, the county report, the finance department is supposed to report on COVID, the CARES Act expenditures every week. Those are due on Monday this week. That's because of the holiday. It's actually going to show up tomorrow. So those will become public tomorrow afternoon. And you can actually go on Open Pierce County and see where those expenditures are at any time, actually. So staff could look at that on the Open Pierce County on the Pierce County website to get some idea of where those expenditures are going, so that we aren't reinventing the wheel. And that is going to be an issue because money is kind of coming in from all sorts of different directions. In some cases, there's grants out there that come on a separate track out of maybe even the same CARES Act, but they're just different dollars, and they go to housing or something like that. So coordination is really going to be key. I think if we get a better cut at it and are able to take care of it here in the next few weeks, I think that's good. But the clock really is running, and the CARES Act money that was directly sent to Pierce County, the county has till the end of the year, right? They have till December 30th. We do not. The state actually put in, I was noticing, and I think the state criteria actually is tougher. It's a shorter time frame, and they seem to have a few more, and I may be wrong, but they seem to have a few more, additions to it or requirements to it. So I think I'm okay with waiting to try to come up with a better work product, but I don't think we should wait too long, because then you're middle of June, and then you're down to basically 3.5 months to try to spend that money. So I'll just put that out there. Thank you.
I just note on the differential with the state, part of that is that their requirement is to have it spent. The feds require the state to have it spent by the end of the year. And so they want everybody to have auditable expenditures far enough in advance so that the state doesn't lose money. So, you have more, Ms. Spear?
I don't. I was just going to ask for a verification. What I think you're asking next steps from staff to be would be additional data and maybe some refinement of what's been provided to you both as a budget and as those priorities. Does the council want to move forward with a resolution identifying how it wants to prioritize funding, or would you rather set that aside? And then I guess the timing as well.
I, for one, would like to set that aside and maybe come back with some prioritized partial expenditures. This is a roll, in some ways it's a rolling thing, I think. And we, whether we decide to expend part of it now, part of it 2 months from now, or go through on a prioritized basis. But I think from what I'm hearing from council is we want to be putting the finger in the dike or plugging holes where we find unmet need. So that's not necessarily what staff had an opportunity to do given the rapidly changing landscape. I mean, money's coming from different directions, and we're just finding out what the state and what the county, even what the feds are doing. So maybe go find some holes and report back on those.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just maybe conclude with, we can be back in front of you at your next study session on June 15th. I think it's June 15th. Correction, June 8th. So we can be in 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks with another update. And then I would just like to close with, so if you're all feeling frustrated in terms of how to use this money, quite frankly, welcome to our world. When we first were notified that we received this money, so we've been kind of hemming and hawing over this as best as we can, essentially the last 4 weeks or so. But one of the things that we wanted to hear this evening is actually, I would say, mission accomplished, because we desperately wanted to hear what your thoughts were and what your feedback are. Because quite frankly, we're kind of working in a little bit of a vacuum in terms of what we thought we knew. So thanks for your feedback.
Thank you. I know there's a lot of hard work that went in this from staff, and there isn't a template for this, no playbook. And to try to spend so much time trying to squeeze projects out of limited dollars to get dollars without projects is reverse engineering at its worst. So thanks again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council.
So we now move to next item of business, electronic reader board update.
All right, I am here. I'm just going to get my video. So good evening, Mayor and Deputy Mayor and Council. I'm here to provide you with an update on the electronic reader board review that was done. And this is on page 86 of your council packets that you received. So the memo that was provided gives an outline and a look at kind of some of the things that we're currently doing as it relates to promoting city events. And I'll just rattle off a few of those with some current numbers to give you a sense of what our current reach is as far as how we are noticing different things that are happening at the city. Obviously, these numbers reflect pre-COVID times as well, back when we had events planned. So taking into consideration the fact that, of course, this year some changes have been made, at least for some of our events. Obviously, we're still having our farmers market, but I would say truthfully, one of the areas in which we see the largest reach is through our use of social media, specifically Facebook. The majority of our audience and the folks that we reach is on our Facebook accounts. And we have 4 different accounts. We have the city's page, we have the Lakewood Police Department page, we have the Lakewood Senior Activity Center page, and the Parks and Recreation page, which is a newer one that was created within the last couple of years. But combined between those 4 pages, we cross promote events so that they reach all the different folks, because you might have some people that are on the police page that aren't on the city page, that aren't on the Senior Activity Center page. And Combined though, between all those pages, we have approximately 34,000 followers. And then with that, in addition, you also have people who like the page, and that's growing every day. Just to give you some perspective, already for this year, we've reached 24,000 people as it relates to promoting the farmers market, which is actually occurring on June 19th. And also Summerfest already has reached 96,000, which of course that event is no longer occurring, but that just lets you know that even roughly a little over a month out, and we already were close to 100,000 people alone that had reached that. And that is both obviously within the city limits, but also of course across the South Sound. The night market, before that was canceled, had about 55,000, and we saw significant reach the minute that one went up. That went viral and went everywhere. And then looking back to events that we've actually held this year for our Martin Luther King ceremony that we had, that had 4,100 folks that were reached. The Colonial Plaza opening that we had last fall, when we kicked off that, we reached 13,600 people. And then our Truck and Tractor event that was last fall was 35,600 as far as people who that reached. So I think, you know, that's really, frankly, one of the few ways where we can truthfully see the numbers and the counts, because the analytics and the data is there. So that lets you know that's Facebook alone. And then of course we have Twitter, Instagram as well for how we promote ourselves. And then typically as well for Summerfest specifically, we do a number of paid advertisements. So we set the target as to what demographic we want to meet. And then we pay for those ads to show up in that demographic's feed. And we do target, because we use LTAC monies, we do target folks in the Seattle region. We even go so far up as to Everett, and then even down south, obviously into Olympia, to try and draw people in. And with that, we also have an immediate return on, we know how many people we're reaching because we're getting those counts. So I know in years past, we've gotten close to around 200,000 people for Summerfest alone as to our reach as far as notifying them that the event's going on. Other ways in which we let the people know about our events is we do have some temporary signs. So those are those reader board signs that are the orange signs that will go up. Often they also are used for our traffic projects. So we let folks what's coming up. We'll usually put those at some high visibility intersections. So for example, Bridgeport Way, right off the freeway there where it intersects with Pack Highway. And those are used to advertise upcoming, you know, opening of the farmers market or Summerfest to let people know. And then we also have the reader board at the Lakewood Police Department station, which advertises our events as well as other upcoming things. And then we work with our community partners. So we work with Clover Park School District, which not only puts our events on their board, I don't know what you call it, it's not an electronic board, but their board that you would slide the letters in. That's at their location at the Student Services Center on Gravelly Lake Drive. And then of course, we partner with them to put communication in their Inside Schools newsletter, which gets mailed home to their student population. And we always promote our events that way as well through that. And of course, they cross promote us on Facebook, just like we do them. So in addition to what we know we're reaching, they also are reaching folks through their accounts. And then we work with West Pierce Fire and Rescue. We have events posted on their reader board at one of their stations on Steilacoom Boulevard. And then of course, our small businesses as well that are willing to. So for example, Allen Realtors often will promote upcoming events at their location off of Gravelly Lake Drive. Then, you know, we have our city magazine, which goes to all of our households. And that is always a great way for us to promote upcoming events as well. That reaches about 31,000 households in Lakewood. We've got our website where we have our city events as a key item on the front homepage. And then you click through and you can see all the events listed. And then we work with South Sound Magazine, as well as Showcase Magazine and The Ranger, and we do stuff. So for example, with our upcoming farmers market, we've already been working with them to help promote the market that's going to be happening. And in fact, they're going to be doing an article South Sound Magazine is going to be doing an article to promote that. And they're working to get stuff up on their social media and have already been helping promote it. And then I work closely with Travel Tacoma Mount Rainier and make sure that our events are listed and being promoted through their website, and then also to the folks that they're trying to reach to bring into Pierce County to draw folks in here. And then the Sub-Times has a direct feed from our website. So anything that we post to our website goes directly to the Suburban Times, and they have about 30,000, or I think Ben even said recently 33,000 readers a month that are accessing that site for content. And then of course we have just different online calendars, which staff goes through and lists our events on those calendars as well across the region to try and help promote what's upcoming. And then we have banners that we will hang up as well for driving traffic. So Fort Silicon Park, there's always a banner strung between the trees. We use the Park Lodge Elementary School fence line right across from the Lakewood Town Center. And then of course at City Hall as well. So that's, I know it's a little lengthy, but I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear of all the various ways in which we are getting our information out. And as I said at the start, I think social media has proven probably the most effective. I know when we held our first ever Cocoa with a Cop event at the police station back in 2018, we really didn't advertise it until about 2 weeks before the event was going to happen. And it was solely on Facebook. And we had a huge turnout, much larger than we were anticipating. And when we asked everyone, every single person that we asked how they heard about it said Facebook. So I think that really showed, of the roughly 300 plus people that came, that was how they learned about it. So that also lets you know too, that's where our folks are living to a degree. So another opportunity that came to light when I was researching this was obviously our PAI has a very large electronic reader board right there at the Bridgeport Way intersection with 100th Street, or sorry, with Lakewood Drive. And that's a very high visible intersection. Obviously there's a lot of cars that do stop at the light. And so they see the flashing from that giant sign. And I reached out to them to find out whether it was a possibility to advertise upcoming city events. And if we could do it throughout the year. And they got back to me and provided me with, which was attached as a part of this memo, a contract, which for tenant price would be $300 a month. So if we chose to do annually, where we promoted the city's events throughout the year, we could pay $300 a month for that for the year, so a total of $3,600 to advertise our event there and get that increased visibility. And then the non-tenant price is the $500 a month price. And then as far as, looking at where could a reader board location be located, one of the things that I wanted to make sure we considered was the most visibility, because obviously the intent of a reader board is to promote our events. So we want to reach more people. You don't want to put this in an offhand spot where no one's going to see it. And so I worked with our public works engineering folks and had them provide me with a list of some of our busiest intersections where there was available right away. And then I cross-referenced that with our planning department to make sure that the zoning would allow for that type of sign to go in. And so those are like the locations that were identified in the memo, showing the possibility for where they could be located. And there's some other considerations to take into effect also. If it's not commercially zoned, then we would have to look at potentially changing the zoning to allow for that to be used. So the three more high traffic areas that were identified were South Tacoma Way, north of 96th Street. There's roughly 33,000 cars that flow through there. It's kind of at the average daily traffic count. And then the other one was Silicon Boulevard east of Edgewater Drive. So down actually where a lot of that road work's happening right now on the Silicon Boulevard improvement project. And then Bridgeport Way north of 75th Street. So that's more as you head toward University Place. And those are the locations that see the most cars. It's questionable as to how many people would be reading. There were other locations that were also had high traffic, but due to competition with other signs, it just really would be hard to get people's attention. And then roads that we identified some locations that have less traffic, but there is adequate right-of-way space to go. So obviously Motor Avenue at the Colonial Plaza near Gravelly Lake Tribe, there's a kind of the cluster of oak trees there. That is a possibility where we do have adequate right-of-way space to put in some sort of reader board sign And obviously the goal too is to build up around that area. But currently there is not a lot of traffic flow that's going along Motor Avenue. However, if it was positioned right, you might be able to catch some Gravelly Lake Drive traffic. And then there is a possibility that there could be a landscaping strip that might be available at Gravelly Lake Drive and Nyanza Road as a part of some of the road improvement projects that are planned for that area. And if that were the case, then we would be able to use that location for a sign because it would basically, we have the ability to even, look at running the conduit and doing all of that. We would need to, though, change the zoning from the current residential zoning to public institutional because currently an electronic reader book sign is currently not allowed in the residential zone. As a part of my research, I also reached out to find out what the costs of these signs were. And I was able to speak to a business owner in Lakewood who has one at H&L Produce. And that sign is 40 square feet as what is the maximum allowed under city code. And it's 3-sided. And he said was roughly $135,000 to purchase that sign, and that's at the maximum square footage. And then he also noted that there's a new sign that had gone in at the Tacoma Boys location up on 6th Avenue, and that one was more like $160,000, and that one's 30 square feet. I also spoke to a salesman who actually sold both of those signs, and he kind of gave me a rough estimate saying you could probably assume about $2,000 per square foot for a sign. At the cheapest, at 40 square feet, that would be $80,000. However, it's likely that that cost would be significantly more due to the fact that you have to also take into account the mounting costs. And if you're going at a location where there is no conduit, then you have to work with the utility companies to provide the cost to connect that to the electricity. Maintenance is a little less, but you have to factor in, well, what if a car hits it? I mean, there's things that you can't, beyond just maintenance of the bulbs. There's a lot of what ifs as far as damage, as we've seen with some of our gateway signs at key intersections being impacted. So he said, really the best way to have a better understanding of cost is to actually go to the desired location and look at it. And then you could get a better reflection of what kind of cost you would need and how high the sign would need to be to get the maximum visibility. So, at this time, the recommendation is to not purchase the sign due to these unknown costs. And of course, the uncertainty that we have right now around the budget impacts due to COVID. However, if the council's interest in this or interest in using our PAI's sign that's out there at Bridgeport, then it's recommended that these requests be considered and prioritized as part of the upcoming biennial budget process. And obviously, we will continue to do what we've been doing to promote our events as we're able to hold them as deemed safe. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions for Ms. Brimley? Mr. Whalen.
Thanks, Bryn. Very thorough report. I appreciate that. The world has changed a little bit in the last couple of months. We were looking at perhaps having a little bit of surplus money from 2019, and now we're not. So that certainly dampens, financial enthusiasm. I wonder if there was an appetite to do something to enhance the communication. Not that what we are doing isn't good, but this would be an alternate way of communicating to different population, or perhaps some overlay or overlap. I wonder if some of the COVID money could be resiliency money for more and better communication. So I throw that out there. I don't know if we've chatted about that, whether or not some of this 1.79 that we just reviewed could be used for internal purposes, in part to enhance communication to the public with regard to emergency issues and the like, not just the publication of events. So I throw that out there. The second thing on the commercial uses by H&L Produce and the others, I assume that they also have Facebook pages, but yet they made some sort of an election to invest in alternate communication such as electronic reader boards. I'm looking at H&L's Facebook page right now, and if it was the be all and end all, I wonder why they invested $135,000 in a reader board. I mean, a rhetorical question.
It's normally to attract people in to your retail.
Yeah, right. I get it. So, you know, I'm fine with the recommendation. I would perhaps look at utilizing the RPAI one if we were inclined to do anything as kind of a test over the next year or maybe a few months of the year just to see what the outcome is. But I still think that there are opportunities to communicate to a different and perhaps wider audience with selective use of reader board work, especially for emergencies as well as events. Those are my thoughts and comments. Not really questions, except the rhetorical one about other people with reader board signs also have Facebook pages and other ways of communicating.
I would note for those of you who were here, don't remember that the reader board at the police station was the result of drug money, confiscated drug money. And so every once in a while they put something up there, don't use drugs, or it has to be used for that. I rarely see anything that relates to the intended purpose of the.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? I don't hear a groundswell of support for spending money on a discretionary item at this point in time.
Right.
But thanks for bringing us up to speed, Ms. Grimley. We appreciate it. I would note, however, too, that I think we actually own a billboard site on 100th. There's a vestige of property along 100th that's pretty close to South Tacoma Way. I think it's on the south side that the city obtained ownership to at one time. It's adjacent to the right-of-way. I seem to vaguely recall that. Probably doesn't have power. So we move to reports by the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. Either tonight or tomorrow, either myself or our communications manager, Bryn Grimley, will send out a draft message from the council to be included in the Lakewood Connection Summer Magazine. That's something that you folks do for every magazine. And the topic that we've drafted is, talking about perseverance through COVID-19 and a message from the mayor and the council in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing. If there's something else that, the council wants us to focus on, we can certainly do that as well. So we'll send that out again either today or tomorrow. And then we need feedback by a week from Thursday. So in the next 10 days or so, June 4th. So again, if you have any feedback or comments on that, please let us know. This seems like a long time ago, but it really wasn't. March 7th, the City Council, you held a retreat to develop your goals for the 21-22 biennium. And of course, we haven't had a follow-up on that because of the current circumstances. However, as we look out into the near future, into certainly maybe the middle of July, there could be an opportunity for this body to actually get together in one room in the City Council chambers or something like that. And so I'd ask that you start thinking about, when you want to do that. And I would certainly recommend as soon as possible. So again, the middle part of July, latter part of July. And also be thinking about, do you want to do it on a Saturday, or do you want to do it maybe in the middle of the week? And, perhaps if you do it in the middle of the week, start off at, 6 in the evening or something like that, or on a Saturday, again, do another day event, something along those lines. Probably in the next week or two, we will have completed, we had again put a pause on it because of some of the other issues we've been dealing with. We expect to have, a follow-up document outlining what you folks all talked about at your March 7th retreat. And what we'll do is as soon as we have that available, we will send that out and load that on your iPads so that you will have an opportunity and some time to really look into that and digest the outcome again from your March 7th retreat. Some COVID-19 updates. Highly unlikely that Pierce County will be moving to phase 2 next Monday on June 1st, based on kind of the current information out there right now. In order to move to phase 2, according to the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department, as a county, we would need to have fewer than 90 COVID-19 cases over a 14-day period. Looking back over the past 14 days, we've had 216 new cases, which averages about 15 a day. So we're about halfway there. The good news is that the trend continues to decline. But again, until those certain criteria as defined by the governor are met, we'll be stuck in phase 1. But again, knock on wood, hopefully in the near future, we can move to phase 2. And then if you recall, the governor has stated that he has established a minimum 3-week wait before moving on to the next phase. So just wanted to report out on that. Last week, we were contacted by Pierce County, and they're going to be providing free personal protective equipment to countywide businesses, including those in Lakewood. And they're going to be doing that over a 3-day period beginning next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. They're going to be doing it at 7 locations throughout the county. Businesses do need to go to a county. The county has a process that they've set up to be able to obtain that. I think they're also providing temperature gauges as well. And we're also looking to identify one of those 7 locations to be in Lakewood, and perhaps it would be on June 2nd. We continue to develop financial scenarios on the impact to our general fund. Right now, our current analysis shows that in 2020, we'll be looking to take a loss of about $6.2 million just in the general fund. That's about an 18% dip based on a existing 40.1 million revenue projection in a perfect world. This would be followed by it would get a little bit better in 2021, but again, the projected loss of revenue would be about $5 million or 14%. And then looking out to 2022, it would be a loss of about $884,000 or 2.2%. So right now, based on the information that we have, we're projecting over the next 3-year period a loss of revenue totaling about $12.1 million. Again, the highest would be about 18%. I think a couple of things you're probably hearing and seeing some larger numbers and percentages out there with other communities. I think a couple of things that are unique about Lakewood, and one is that our revenues are very, very inelastic, which means that when things are going really, really well, they don't grow at a higher rate. But likewise, when things are going really, really bad, and certainly this would qualify, we don't see our losses dropping down into that 25 or 30% level that other cities and counties are projecting, but still quite substantial. The other caveat I'd like to point out on this is that we're still waiting for some significant revenues to come in just for March, like for example, sales tax. So until we get 2, 3, or even 4 months of data, we're really not going to know what the true impact is. So we're kind of really going off of past recessions that have occurred. So that's where we are. More to come on that. We're also then looking at, okay, how do we address this financial gap as we look out into 2020, but also into the next biennium. And I'm hoping to be back in front of you, perhaps at a regular meeting or your second study session in June with an update on that. So again, more to follow. On the federal side, I think as I reported, Congress on the House side, they did pass a bill called the HEROES Act that would provide funding to local municipalities. Our municipality actually under that plan would receive over a 2-year period, $42.7 million. Last week, the two senators introduced what's called the State and Municipal Assistance for Recovery and Transition, or the SMART Act, specifically to assist local governments to the tune of $500 billion. Those dollars would be allocated in 3 tranches based on population, level of infection within that area, and revenue losses. I think, as I previously reported, unemployment claims, those fraudulent claims, we received 1 or 2 late last week, but it looks like it's kind of come to a bit of a stall. But basically, it was 20 of our employees who are current employees were notified that folks had filed claims on them. And we're now finding out that that was coming primarily from overseas, as far as that's the last I had. We also, the city attorney provided me, and I passed on to you this evening, the latest emergency order from the Pierce County Superior Court. So they have put off 12-person civil jury trials, will not commence until November 1st, 2020. However, 6-person civil juries will commence beginning on September 1st, or at least that's the plan right now. Last week, the Port of Tacoma awarded the city a $50,000 grant to help with the design of a project over in Woodbrook. You don't have the construction dollars, but the design dollars. It's always good to be able to get a project on the shelf. I want to thank our economic development manager, Becky Newton, for spearheading that. And again, thank the Port of Tacoma and their board for their support. This is something that this is the second time in the last couple of years that the port has done that. We continue to have conversations with Pierce County, with their planning and public works department regarding implementing PALS Plus. And so we have a road ahead, if you will. We kind of had a bit of a stumbling block there with the current emergency, but we are now back on track. We expect rollout to be in the latter part of this year. I know we were originally anticipating, the July, August, September timeframe, but again, we had to take a bit of a pause based on current circumstances. So now we're looking at fourth quarter. Also, the county has committed to an annual cost of what it will cost the city of Lakewood. That annual cost is $57,000 a year. That is a really, really good number, given the complexity and the sophistication of this system. Plus, it's tried and true. It's a proven asset here in the county, particularly with the development community. So to say I'm excited about this is probably a bit of an understatement. Really want to thank Dave Buer and his team, as well as the county and their folks for working with us on this. Also want to recognize our community connector, the 2-2 Stryker Brigade, and particularly the headquarters company from the 423, who had a number of their soldiers come out and provide some sweat equity last Thursday on a number of projects, helping our police department, CSRT, parks, and public works on a number of projects, including some private properties, some elderly folks who just needed some assistance with maintaining their property. So kudos to them. I mentioned last week that the Defense Community Infrastructure Program, we had submitted a comment letter. Likewise, last Tuesday, our federal delegation, or representatives from our federal delegation, particularly Mr. Heck and Mr. Kilmer, submitted a similar letter. We learned today that, long story short, some of our bigger asks, for example, having a 30% match instead of a 50% match, having transportation projects separate from other projects, OEA did not take those into account in their rules. So now we move forward with preparing the grant application and submitting it by the June 26th deadline. However, what we are going to do is develop a letter of some sort outlining our continued concerns and working with our federal delegation to see if they can have those changes incorporated into federal law, so that the next round of funding does take into account our concerns and issues. Development services activity, while it's not at 2018 and 2019 levels, quite frankly, continues to outpace our expectations, not just because of COVID-19, but just even under normal circumstances. We continue to be very, very busy with the permits, but also right now there are 57 projects, mostly housing, and industrial uses making their way through different levels of the development services process. So, so that's, that's a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel on that. And then the last item I wanted to bring up and have a recommendation here, and this gets back to your earlier meeting or your earlier discussion with the Planning Commission, is regarding a safe car camping site. So last week, we were contacted by a representative of the United Methodist Church, which is over in Steilacoom Boulevard. And they would like to establish a safe car camping site in their parking lot. It's a pilot program that would be funded with some monies from the Metropolitan Development Council. So meaning it would be the only one in Pierce County. Also, the proposal we did clarify is to only allow cars and not RVs. And the purpose would be to allow people who are living out of their cars to sleep in their cars in the parking lot from 7 p.m. through 7 a.m., a 12-hour period. Some of the feedback that we provided, since they asked, was mostly regarding safety issues, but also another recent state legislative bill called House Bill 1754, which I'll come back to in a moment. However, we did note that if you allow people on your property, they might interpret that that's their home. And under the governor's current moratorium on evictions, you might not be able to get them off of your property. And so we just wanted to point that out to them. Also, rather than just allowing anybody to come, one of the areas that we know where people need help are, women and women with children, particularly those who need help, trying to escape domestic violence. And, that's something that we regularly hear back from the YWCA in terms of, safe places for folks in those situations to go to. And the church, they seemed real amenable to that, and they were really appreciative of the feedback. We don't know if this is going to come to fruition or not, but again, I just wanted to give you a courtesy heads up on that. Now, getting back to the past legislative session, so the state adopted new regulations for hosting of temporary homeless encampments by religious organizations. And it applies to all counties, it applies to cities, all cities and towns here in Washington State. It doesn't take effect until June 11th, so a couple more weeks. But what it allows is them to host temporary encampments on their property. It can be within buildings or elsewhere on their property, such as their parking lots. Cities are prohibited from enacting any ordinance or regulation that exceeds the minimum health and safety requirements. So our hands are tied from a zoning standpoint. So it's quite restrictive. It was something that Association of Washington Cities and Cities in general had some concerns with. But again, it is now law and it goes into effect on June 11th. However, it does allow an opportunity for the city to work with the religious facility on the types of services that they're providing. However, in order to do that, there needs to be a memorandum of understanding between the city and the religious facility. In order to move forward with that MOU, the legislative body, i.e. the mayor and the city council, need to adopt an ordinance essentially memorializing this. And so my recommendation is that we move forward and developing an ordinance, working through the Planning Commission and bringing back a recommendation for your review and consideration commensurate with House Bill 1745 here in the very near future. And if the council gives us the nod to go ahead and do that, I'm pretty confident it's work that we can get done over the next 2 to 3 month period. So that's the report that I had on that particular item, and I'd be more than happy to try and answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Caulfield? Ms. Moss?
Mayor, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Who's going to be responsible for evicting those people should that become necessary?
So you're coming in a little distorted, Councilmember Moss. So I think is the question who's responsible for, you know, maintaining security and operating the site and all of that?
Yes.
Thank you for clarifying that. So it would actually be the religious facility. It would be the church. They would be responsible for security, and they noted that they would hire security, particularly during, you know, the nighttime hours. They would provide sandy cans, washing facilities, things along those lines. They would be responsible for all of that.
I would just note that that is a busy section, that area there. So to keep it neat would be something that would have to be really enforced.
That's a great point, Councilmember Moss. And that's where I think the value of the MOU would come into play, where the city would have some influence on how to help facilitate that.
Correct. Thank you.
Is there anyone who has an objection to the city manager moving forward to submit something to the Planning Commission, keep our options open as to our limited regulatory authority? Any other questions for the city manager? Right.
I would just like to add one final comment regarding, you know, the United Methodist Church. They're very good to work with. They're very cooperative. They do a lot of good in the community. They provide meals to folks in the community on a very, very regular basis, as well as, I believe, serve sometimes as a food bank. So they're very, very actively engaged in the community. So if this was to come to fruition, I think we would have a good, positive partner here as well.
Right. Thank you. We'll move to council comments. Ms. Moss. I hope that's that you have no comments and you're not editorial. It's not an editorial comment.
No comment, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciated the memorial ceremony last Thursday at JBLM with Tutu, and I greatly appreciated Colonel Chung's remarks. I thought he was concise, he was to the point, and was very well done. Otherwise, I am through for the night, sir. Thank you.
Mrs. Farmer.
At the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board meeting tonight, first of all, I'm really glad we had one. It was great to get the gang back together. We saw a preview of a very well researched and very well thought out arts community plan that we will all be seeing in more detail at our joint meeting, I believe on June 8th, so more to come there. At the AWC Large City Advisory meeting last week, it was great to meet regional leaders across the area and get up to speed on our work. And I advocated for TIF work at the legislative level, and they smiled and they said, oh, there's Lakewood advocating for TIF again. I said, you bet your bottom dollar we're advocating for TIF again. At the Sex Offender Policy Board that I now sit on, at the meeting on Friday, everybody got up to speed on the reason, the special assignment that the board is meeting again to review current reentry and least restrictive alternative policies and practices. This is everything from the development of treatment plans to the process by which the community is notified when there is a release of a sexually violent predator. So I'll be sitting on the Siting and Placements Committee, and the first meeting of that committee is on Thursday. So the group is going to be doing some work ahead of a fall deadline to report back to the legislature ahead of session. So I also wanted to have a discussion about a proposed hearing for, I believe, next week about fireworks. I know that this is an issue with many passionate supporters. No matter what the council might be putting forward, I would like to ensure that we have robust debate. And our current format, in my opinion, does not really allow for robust debate. I understand that we have to, when we enact a code amendment like this, it takes a year for it to take effect. So I understand we have a very small amount of time if we want to do something ahead of it going into effect for next year. So I'm wondering if there's any interest on the council for maybe looking at a different type of interactive meeting, town hall style, audio only, call in with a moderator, a live chat box feature, just discuss.
Mr. Caulfield, what are our options?
I'm sorry, I just, I got disconnected.
I'm going to jump in here. Essentially, the manager has asked us specifically about this question, and the question is, what are the options for a robust debate of the fireworks topic, given the virtual meetings that we're having? And we've already had the deputy mayor comment on how this somewhat inhibits the ability to do that. One of the reasons that we need to be having this public hearing now is that if the council does wish to make any law that's more restrictive than state law, it has to take place before the 4th of July this year in order to take effect next year. There's a 1-year lag. So that's why we're kind of pushing it as we can. That being said, for this particular type of ordinance, a public hearing is not required. It's something the council asked for because of exactly what Councilmember Farmer said, which is that they want robust input. So that takes us to whether our staff can deliver what the council is hoping for. You may remember me from a past meeting where we did an executive session and I implored you not to extend it because we just weren't sure what we would and wouldn't be able to do. I think it goes without saying that we could do a fledgling effort at community input. I am not sure how it will play out. I am not sure what kind of a lag time there would be between comments. It might depend on whether we're talking about phone calls or video. So we had a conversation about this because the manager made it clear that the council is interested in as much public input as we can get. We've done a lot of outreach. We've gotten some feedback. In a typical public hearing, I would be giving you my box example where everything has to go into the box and that's your public hearing. For this type of public hearing where you are soliciting as much input as you can get, one option is to take all of the input and not put an end date until the day you actually take action. So you could take all of the input we get up until Monday and we can review that with you and then continue to take input until the next regular meeting where you take action on the item. That would give people time to not just juggle whatever technology we're trying to use and convey to us their thoughts, but be able to give that thoughtful input in a written way. And I will tell you, part of this is born of my fear of what the technology may or may not do. It will be the first time we've tried to do it with a public hearing. And I also think there's a little bit of irony to the fact that we have conducted legally required public hearings without this, but on a public hearing that's not legally required, we're going to try to make that work. That's editorial from the lawyer's perspective, just because I see what lawyers sometimes do with those kinds of distinctions. I appreciate why the council is interested in doing that. I would want to make sure that we get every comment. And I think sometimes the best way to do that is to get some sort of a record going on it. But obviously we will defer to you, and I defer electronically and technologically to our clerk, Brianna Schumacher, who I think will tell you that we can give it a shot. We just haven't really tested it, but she's here if you wish to hear from her.
So Paul Bulke may actually know this from his day job, but the county council, while it televises its meetings, has the ability, it has a rather unusual requirement. Every amendment, every resolution, every anything, they open for public comment. And I believe they're doing that by telephone, are they not, Paul?
Yeah, they actually had 2 people call in at public comment today. I think that might not be the first one, but it was the first ones I heard, and there were actually 2 people who called in on the phone. I was surprised. We don't get a lot, So I will say, now that I've been invited into the conversation, I would caution. I don't believe that this ordinance is necessary or routine. It has to be under the governor's guidelines, necessary and routine. It's neither, in my mind. And so we risk the industry taking us into court, and I think we would lose. I'm not an attorney. I'll defer to counsel, but I just don't think it meets the necessary and routine guidelines. Just because there's a deadline on it by the end of June, that doesn't meet necessary and routine.
Yeah, I think that I'd like legal counsel look into that. It's since we have not done it any number of years when it's come up as a subject, it's hard to say that it's routine.
I do think you run that risk, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I think that there's potentially that risk. And if it was something that was far less controversial, I might be saying there's probably not a chance of having repercussions from it. But this is definitely a topic.
There's an economic interest that would be.
Absolutely. Well, that's the reason for the 1 year delay. The legislative history is that they give 1 year so that people who earn their living through the sales of fireworks can prepare for any kind of a reduction in their earning ability.
Mr. Brandstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The presence of this public hearing on the agenda next week is also something that I'm concerned about, and my recommendation to you is that you cancel the public hearing. First of all, it's it's true that when we were having our general discussion in response to the PSAC recommendation to move forward the next year with an education program to try to change behavior around fireworks, that we thought that having a public hearing would get us some broad new ideas from the community to be able to go and do that. I'm actually confused how the public hearing got framed around a specific proposal, because I don't recall us coming to a consensus around advancing a specific proposal, which makes the public hearing and this suspense to try to do something by June 30th that I never thought that we were at that urgency. We were just trying to build a bit more data around what the PSAC was able to have. This is a conversation, as Councilmember Farmer said, that we can push off into the future and get into a format of gathering public input like we have for the legacy plan and other things over this an extended period of time, and we shouldn't constrain ourselves to do that. And I would concur with Councilmember Boki's thought that this is not a topic, either the hearing or the ordinance that the hearing frames that fits into either an emergency or routine situation to do that. I think if you were to take this off the agenda, we can do a better job, as we have done every 3 or 4 years for the 10 years I've been on the council, of where people just keep coming back to us, not happy with the status quo.
So it looks like between the just kind of straw poll and the legal implications, we may want to bump this, but we can leave it on the agenda and consider it as a motion to continue to a date certain or pass on it.
Yes, that's definitely an option, Mr. Mayor. You can take the public input that you get and set it over to a time when the public can actually attend. That's definitely an option. It's on me that this remained on for June 1st because we looked at the fact that we weren't going to be able to have a live public hearing, but I was aware of that legal deadline and postponing it by a year if we missed the deadline. And I hear the council loud and clear that as usual, the problem is in the legal department, and we will hear you out, and we understand the direction at this time.
Speaking of lawyers, Mr. Whalen.
I think everyone's answered the question. We need more time to get more robust public comment, and I would support that. My question to Ms. Wachter, I'm not sure, as I sit here, when this Zoom attendance and appearance will end. Are we of any sort of like mind that it's going to be early June, mid-June? What is that?
We basically hang on by a thread for each announcement from the state. Okay. And last time we got it about a week ahead of the end of the period that we thought we were going to have to be here. And actually, and the clerk can confirm me on this, I think she's putting on the announcement that it's either or. Because right now, as we sit here, we don't know whether this will continue to June 1st. And we will tell you whatever form we can hold a legally compliant meeting, we are prepared to do that. It's just a question as to what the order is. So could we arguably have an open council chambers on Monday? It's conceivable, but I think one of the things to consider, and I'm hearing the council say they want that public input, even if it was completely open, right, people be coming in, and are you going to get the kind of input that you're looking for? Because what I'm hearing is that you want people to really engage on this one.
Very, very fair point. I think we just have to be cognizant of the fact that it is likely, if we have a public hearing, it's going to result in a decision one way or the other that's not going to impact fireworks until 2022. I just think we have to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
One way or the other. It's either going to be status quo or some modest modification that we've reviewed as options in the past. So, I'm fine.
Mr. Brandstetter.
I don't have my hand raised, Mayor.
Well, we're doing council comments. It's your turn.
Oh, we're going back to that. I see. Well, I would just say that I appreciated the 2-2. I appreciated the fact that there was an effort to have a Memorial Day ceremony at a virtual ceremony at Mountain View. And the other places that found a way to recognize Memorial Day as opposed to just canceling things. I think, having those ceremonies and the tradition that goes with them is important, particularly in a community like ours that is has a great many people with ties to the military service from both back in families and to current. I would just had one other question about the agenda. Next time is in what form are we thinking about youth council recognition? I think that's on the agenda.
Mr. Caulfield.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, actually just doing a recognition of the youth council, it would be you folks. I don't know if we'll be able to get the kids to kind of zoom in with you. similar to what the Planning Commission did.
Okay, did they do a tape, or could we at least play the tape that they were intending to show so that anybody from the public that looks at it could look at it?
I believe so. Councilmember.
Okay, and is that similar too for the young man from the Boys and Girls Club? Are we going to give him this win?
He's been bumped out to July or August.
Okay, so that's not going to be on the agenda as well. Okay, that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Hey, Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Enjoyed tonight. I think we getting a lot of things done. I do have one question. I mean, I'm very pleased at the progress on the roads, but my question is the artwork that we're supposed to be getting. Is that still on track for this summer, late summer, early fall? The gal from Eastern Washington.
Yeah, she's still working. You're talking over at the Colonial Plaza, Councilmember?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
No.
so that project continues. She's been a little delayed because of supply and line issues. So she's hoping by this fall or winter.
But it's still on track. Okay.
Well, the
right.
project's on track. The timing has been pushed back, but yeah, she's still moving forward. But yeah, she has some supply line issues that she's been dealing with.
Okay, good. That's all I got, Mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Whalen.
Gotta find the right budget button here. It's just been a busy week of Zoom calls and meetings like many of you have experienced. I had the community engagement leadership team. We actually met again, as you may recall. That's the group of folks that are focused on coming up with a plan of action for the Clover Park School District to have a caring adult in the life of every child. So more to follow on that as we formulate the final plan with input from a number of stakeholders, hopefully to kick off sometime in the fall, commensurate with the school year, which we hope is going to be a normal kickoff to a school year, but that remains to be seen. On the economic development front, those of you who may have tapped into some of the weekly calls at the Economic Development Board of Tacoma Pierce County, along with the Chamber of Commerce host, with various figures from around the community, whether Danny Heck or Derek Kilmer or other business luminaries. A lot of good information is being pushed out to local business folks in the community. From the internal side, as a member, the City of Lakewood is a member of the Economic Development Board and investor with the EDB. EDB is going through its 5-year work plan that has been formulated by the executive committee and the actual board itself. That is a project that they do every 5 years to kind of forecast out, much like the city does, a 5-year work plan with an eye toward what they want to accomplish and how much money it's going to take to get there. So with the recent COVID issues, the EDB and its consultants have kind of narrowed the focus to certain business activities that they think will be not only helpful, but critical to the business community in the next 5 years. So more to follow on that. But the bottom line is council members know, we invest in the EDB annually as part of the EDB's overall budget. And I'm sure that we're going to be asked to do the same once the work plan is finalized and unfolds here in the next 6 months. So that'll be certainly on the manager's plate to review and recommend to all of us, but it's something that's on the horizon. That's it.
Thank you. Well, Thursday, I had the privilege of opening and closing the first virtual South Sound Military Community Partnership Elected Officials Council meeting. I think we had something like 130 participants at one time or another, and at least half of those finished it. So that was a real good showing, especially in light of the fact that it was a pretty late decision to go forward and try to do it virtually. So we kept the momentum going, and I think that's a good thing. Along with the city manager and council's members, Simpson and Brandstetter, I attended the 2-2 Stryker Brigade's memorial service on Friday. I thought it was particularly well done, given that they had to reinvent the way that they had it. There was very limited, representative from each unit standing instead of the units. And they did it virtually at the same time. So that was, I think, a worthwhile excursion. I had the opportunity to be a fly on the wall for the governor's call this morning to, or I think it was 1 o'clock, to the mayors of Tacoma, Everett, Seattle, and the 3 county executives. There is exactly what the phase 2 transition is going to be for those 3 counties is, I think, still up in the air. There may be some modification to the hard criteria that seem to have been set down. There was a strong advocacy from across the board for that, particularly because compliance needs public buy-in, and the folks are getting particularly restless in other places. The demonstrations are getting larger in Snohomish County, and so there may be some movement, and it's kind of speculating toward goals, and so it isn't a particular hard number of new cases for a 14-day average that you must beat, or you can't go to phase 2. They take all the criteria in together and make a informed judgment, and it may be something different for the 3 counties in the urban core of Puget Sound than it is other places, recognizing that the economy here is different. It's a more urban environment. So we shall see. The 7-day average of new cases in Pierce County dipped under 10, and with only 3 new cases, and that will fluctuate back up. On another positive note, 2 major homeless shelters were tested last week, and there were no cases. So the speculation that that is a highly vulnerable population that would be infected rampantly is not panning out. And that's pretty consistent across the country. The death rate is among homeless individuals is pretty much on par with everybody else that's of that age group. Much more in danger if you're over 60. I'd like to commend the 5 people who were watching us on YouTube. Thank you for joining us tonight. I signed on because my internet was flickering a little bit, and it's encouraging to see that people will participate. And Thursday, I'm going to attend virtually another frustrating meeting of the Puget Sound Regional Council Executive Board, where there's going to be on the consent agenda, there's over $100 million of additional federal transportation agency funding for transit. Staff has plugged it into the formula they use to allocate that's based on how much money you spend. The rich get richer, while Pierce County is about 25% or so, or a little more, of the population in the 4 county areas in the area of the MPO, and 12% of the state's population. This is the 2nd time in a row it's slated to be allocated 4% of the money. So the people who really need transportation as a lifeline, the people in our city, in Springbrook, Woodbrook, Tillicum, in Parkland, in Eastside Tacoma, who don't have another way around because Pierce Transit is a poorer agency and has a less robust funding source, will get less money. It's not based on per capita, it's not based on need, it's based on greed. And the largest share of the money is slated to go to Sound Transit for such things as $9 million for cost overruns on their Northgate project. I'm going to ask to have it removed from the consent agenda. 3 or 4 other people will say that the funding allocation is not fair. We really should do something about it, and King County will pass it. So more of the same. Just another reason we need another MPO. But at least there are some voices from the periphery of the Seattle core that are singing the same song now. So keep trying. Anything else to come before the council? Well, thank you very much for attending, participating, and your great ideas. We're adjourned.
Good night.